The history of the human race begins with a family. And these are the words of Herman Bavinck in his book, The Christian Family, in 1912. Bavinck lived at the convergence of a massive social international change. The Industrial Revolution was in full steam. That was a pun. And there was rapid urbanization. People were moving into the cities. There was joblessness. Socialism and feminism were on challenging traditional views in the public and private spheres. There was a massive family breakdown. And the question that was asked of Bavinck in that time was, will the family survive? No religion can offer the hope that Christians have today, because we reflect on a God who meets all of our needs, both as the Creator and Redeemer. Paul states this in a convincing way when he writes to the Corinthians, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in Christ." As Christians, we live as beacons to this hope in a dark and broken world, and that is in need of a desperate need of a full-orbed answer that can only be given through the gospel. So we're going to be talking about family and marriage created by God and its ultimate purpose in redemption. As you can see, I do not have a PowerPoint because all of my points are powerful. Thank you. I'm going to highlight today on why the family is being attacked by the enemy, what we see in contemporary society. And I'm also going to speak about the importance of the family in creation as well as recreation or redemption. So let's begin in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them. And God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. And have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. This passage is the operating system of man and God's created order. Let's go now to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22. "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourishes it, cherishes it, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, of his bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, For this is right, honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment, with a promise that it may be well with you, that you may live as long on the earth. We live in a post-Obergefell era. The redefinition of marriage created a vacuum in which we find ourselves. Much of the issues of current society, mainline churches, would be appalled by some of the texts that we just read this morning. They would find ways to say, well, that was just for that time. Paul was maybe addressing certain issues. Some mainline churches would argue that Paul is a misogynist, patriarchal, he's evil. This text is offensive to their ears and prescribes the role to men and women. And yes, it claims, has the veracity to claim that there is a male and female only as God created them. Male and female distinction has been eliminated from marriage, and other creational categories have become irrelevant. And much of the problems that we face today in society have been documented through this form of our Sunday school class. And we focused at one point a few years ago, I did a talk on the rise of neo-paganism. And I mentioned how in the 1960s, it was a shift that occurred in the West. America had changed religions. The 1960s establishment or anti-establishment of drugs, sex, rock and roll. The 60s, as the university students would chant, hey ho, what do you know, Western Civ has got to go. Kind of like a Ramones song. The 60s revolution was not simply just a sexual revolution, it was a spiritual one that sociologists called the New Age mysticism into the West. As the hippies went east and the gurus came west. Much of what took place inscribed Hinduism into our culture and reconfigured the way that we understand things today. This movement would shatter the common American assumption that the worldview of the scriptures is normative. The spiritual and sexual revolution did in fact bring about a total change and permeated into the arts, it permeated into science and politics, and through program media it was brought into the homes. The hippies brought this new moral and ethic into their home, creating a family that produced a pagan culture. And as an effect, millennials became the first generation to have been raised with a fully developed neo-pagan cosmology or worldview. And it masquerades as the correct view of history. And if your view of history is incorrect, it's wrong, you're not going to know where you are, you're not going to know where you're from, you are not going to know where you're going. And how true is this for the millennial and Zoomer generation? They're armed with this ignorance, and they're demanding it to be inscribed into public policy. And this is a radical, reimagined view of marriage as well as family. For the millennial and Zoomer generation, marriage is not essential. It's for the majority of millennials, their parents were divorced, so why get married at all? It didn't work for mom and dad, so why take on this baggage, the heartache, the dysfunction that arises from a childhood fragmented by divorce? They're not willing to want to put their children through it if they have children at all. The sexual restriction of the boomer generation and Gen X can find a true expression of what love is. And don't you know that love is love? Having children only contributes to the problem of overpopulation and the destruction of the planet, adding too many carbon footprints. Children are expensive. And why raise a child in a world where we cannot resolve the problems at hand or give them the financial life of luxury that, well, we think that they need? Many millennials and Zoomers don't believe that marriage is relevant or that having a family is worth pursuit. While the rates of divorce have gone down significantly for millennials, it's mostly because millennials just don't marry. And I'm finding as I travel to churches and speak at conferences that young women are having a hard time, actually those who are millennial and Zoomers, they're having a hard time finding men because that most of the men are in their mom's basement playing video games or addicted to pornography, where I'm finding young men who want to find someone to get married to, and they're finding that the women out there are more devoted to the career life and don't want to settle down and raise children with them. The Pew Research said that a majority of millennials are not currently married, which is a significant change from previous generations. 44% as of 2019 of millennials were married. 44%. That's mid-40s to mid-30s, or mid-30s to mid-40s. 44% are not married, compared to 53% of Gen X, 61% of boomers, 81% of silent age. The median age at first marriage for the average man at the age in 2019 was 30 years old, where for average for a woman was 28. This is 3 years later for men. 2003, 4 years later than in 1987, and 7 years later for those of 1968. So we're seeing this rather than going to school, graduate college, get married, settle down, raise family, we're seeing go to school or don't go to school and just disappear, and eventually finally realizing, yeah, maybe I should get married because of tax. This might be a tax benefit. About 1 in 5 millennial men reside with their own child and are still unmarried. This is higher than previous generations. This reimagined roles of relationship that we see today, in which husbands had been traditionally and naturally seen as fathers and protectors, and wives as committed to raising children, are considered oppressive and patriarchal. It's what has become is the norm of today now is more of a pagan understanding of sexuality, where there are no clear distinctions, but a broad chasm of the gender spectrum based upon self-autonomous, self-creating expression of reality. I feel, therefore I am that I am. All of this stems from a spiritual revolution that took place in the 60s. And the seismic shift allowed for the postmodern theories of the day to reign supreme. One of these postmodern theories we've gone over before, and it's wise that we continue to address these issues, is cultural Marxism. Theologian Jerry Newcomb stated that America is a grand experiment encapsulated by an idea that flies in the face of Marxism. Self-rule under God. Remove either part, the self-rule or the under God, as our internal and external enemies would like to see happen, and we would no longer have an America as founded. It would seem that we are faced with a choice of two options for our national future, which is revival or ruin, end quote. Karl Marx, who was an atheist, hated God, believed that the changing of our surroundings and our human society is essentially a revolutionary practice. He believed that God and religion were a byproduct of humanity, specifically the family. He said this: after the earthly family is discovered to be the secret of the holy family, the former must then itself be destroyed in theory and in practice. In other words, if the family as a unit is destroyed, you will be rid of God, who is the creator and ultimate oppressor. G.K. Chesterton said, once you abolish God, the government becomes the God, the de facto God in society. So the transformation of the family is of essential importance to the program of the progressive and neo-Marxist. Marx and later Engels sought to destroy the Western Christian notion of the natural family in order to put into its place the all-powerful state. The state would be the surrogate family. Marxists argue that the nuclear family teaches passive acceptance of hierarchy, patriarchy at the behest of capitalism by acting as an independent island within the culture of independent thought and practice. It is also the institution through which the wealthy pass down their private property to their children, thus reproducing class inequality. Now think about that. What does the scriptures say about inheritance? It's a good man who leaves an inheritance to their children's children. The idea of being able to pass on wealth as family is evil. The voice of the sluggard. By hard work and perseverance, a man establishes himself. It is a good father who wants to see his children prosper. It's a good father and mother who want to be able to pass on some of the fruits of that labor to their children and to their grandchildren, so that they don't start from ground zero, but can build upon a foundation that's laid over a lifetime. When you strip the family of its influence in society, if you strip the family of its wealth, then you strip the family of its influence in society. One of our senior fellows of the ministry I work for at TruthXChange, he's in England right now, and he said, we are increasingly seeing forms of taxation that aren't only progressive. It's inheritance taxes, for example. For in Great Britain, confiscatory taxes that strip the family of property and influence to enrich the modern state and its bureaucracy and its provision of welfare, so that the state actually becomes the new integrating concept. It becomes the new surrogate family, the source of provision and welfare. Neo-Marxism fundamentally despises God and the family and replaces the social class wars of Marxism with the sexual class wars. It's not just a war between rich and poor, it's the strong and the weak. It's the oppressed and the oppressors. It is a leveling and eradication of creational norms, the distinctions of male and female binary, natural roles of fathers as heads of homes, wives as keepers of the home and their children, the tradition of parents stewarding, nurturing, educating, and raising children, which are positive elements for the good of society, are now entrusted to the state to do those things. And this is a liberation of Christian ethics, and specifically sexual ethics. The married couple are to give their children to the state through state education, to be raised and indoctrinated with values that are pagan, from LGBTQ alphabet propaganda, confusing gender trans ideology, worship of Mother Earth. All of this is to produce what is hoped for, a utopia. But it is a pagan utopia. Cultural Marxism, its goal is to liberate the human being from the chains of God's created cosmic structures. And I think of Psalm 2. Be wise, ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges, lest the rod of iron come crashing upon you. Sexual identity. The rejection of the family now espouses an even more radical revolution by redefining sexuality as a whole. Being queer is more than sleeping with a person of the same gender. It means transforming the very fabric of society. The goal is the radically reordering of society's view of the family. This, you could say, is a part of the fundamental transformation of present society. This is where what the conservative leaders failed to see at Obergefell. This is that, and some conservative leaders enthusiastically endorsed the Supreme Court's decision to legalize homosexual marriage, proudly seeing it merely as an addition to the civil rights movement. What they failed to see is that neo-Marxists use this new sexual ideology, lending additional power to Marxist long-term intention to destroy the family. You may remember Kevin and Daniel have both talked about the long march or the long haul. The vision seeks to undermine the millions of normal moms and dads with kids in natural families for the sake of a minuscule percentage of people driven by a sexual ideology that scriptures call unnatural. It's Romans 1, 25 and 26. It is the revolution. Natural families have to become unnatural. Lenin also was committed to toppling the husband-wife father, mother roles of the natural family. He advocated for freeing women from their enslavement to the perpetual care of children by creating community-based parenting. It takes a village. Such communes would successfully undermine the classic understanding of the family. And it's not surprising that contemporary neo-Marxist feminists are intrigued by Lenin's model. The woman has to be relieved of what is natural to her order, childbearing, child-rearing. The fetters of motherhood have to be broken off. And she would enjoy the same rights and duties as a man. Anything a man could do, a woman can do. So the state becomes a surrogate family then, in her absence, and as well as the father's absence, and ensures and maintains that all citizens are members, that family with equal rights. Because in their view, it goes back to that all is one. There is no distinction between God and creation. There is no distinctions between male and female, mothers, fathers, because all is one. There was an article that came out a few years ago by Sophie Lewis. She was the author of Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family, as well as the book Abolish the Family, a Manifesto for Care and Liberation. She was a feminist, obviously. And she put this in her opinion piece: we deserve better than the family. The time of coronavirus is an excellent time to practice abolishing it. In her article, The Coronavirus Crisis, shows it's time to abolish the family. She states, nuclear households are where we are all intuitively expected to retreat in order to prevent widespread ill health. But the home does not work for queer and feminized people. Households are capitalism's pressure cookers. The nuclear family is training us to be inhabitants of a binary gendered, radically stratified system, training us not to be queer. Notice the push for the non-binary, non-distinction. Queerness interlocks ideologically with classic Marxism. This is the intersectionality piece. The title in the review of Lewis' thought says it all. Want to dismantle capitalism? Abolish the family. At the beginning of the 20th century, Marx and Engels demanded that the children be wards of the state, which would take over their parenting in order to brainwash the rising generation into classic Marxism. This same organizational principle, if applied, would not only achieve feminist ideals, but normalize an abnormal sexual behavior and identities. Now, this was at the turn of the 20th century. The seeds are planted in the classrooms, and now it's referred today as the Long March, a Long Haul. While we had a drastic shift in spirituality, these notions of pagan humanity have been in the shadows of the school desk and the dust of the chalkboard. This is all to counter the Christian worldview. A husband and wife, this is a quote by Puritan Isaac Ambrose. He said, the husband and wife had the privileged task of erecting and establishing Christ's glorious kingdom in their house. Remember, as Presbyterians, we hold to the Westminster Larger and Shorter Catechism, as well as Westminster Confession of Faith. In the beginning of the Westminster Confession of Faith, there's a dedication. Do you know who the Catechism and the Confession is dedicated to? It's not to the state. It's not the Church of England. It's not to the Puritans. It's to the fathers and mothers. It's heads of households. Our catechism, our confession of faith, is dedicated first and foremost. Why? So that you would instruct your children in how they should worship and serve God. Historically, Christians have believed that the family was a place, the grounds, the schoolroom, where the first principles and grounds of government and subjection and every other aspect and basics of life are learned. It was the place of catechesis. And I've said this before, catechize your children or the devil will. Catechize your children or neo-Marxists will. Catechize your children, insert. Catechesis is a natural thing. We all do it. The question is how well do we do it, and are we being intentional about doing it? Here's a piece that came out last fall by USA Today called Back to School Make Health Kit. Parents can include naloxone, contraceptives, and COVID tests. Think about this. What is this? The premise of this piece is that parents may not be able to stop your kids from doing drugs or having promiscuous sex, but let's at least try and facilitate it well. We've lost our minds here. And if the issues of the secular age or neo-pagan age isn't enough in trying to inflict war on the family and marriage, we also have it from internally. We have wolves within the flock. But there are modern evangelicals have begun to spin this war in recent times, saying things that singleness is the new spiritual aspiration, that marriage is actually, to desire marriage is an idolatry, that Jesus and Paul reconfigured marriage and family in the new covenant from the Old Testament. Let me say this, marriage is about companionship, marriage is about covenant, it is about community, it is about cosmology. The Apostle Paul, in 1 Corinthians 7, he's offering the church wisdom, and I'm just going to quick comment on singleness, because the way that singleness is being spun is well, Paul said, if you're single, stay single. It's being now spun that this is the new, it's almost like the new office. It's the new spiritual gift that everyone should aspire to. And doesn't the church is so concerned about marriage because we've been fighting all these culture wars over marriage. So really that is an idolatry, which is nonsense. In 1 Corinthians 7, when the apostle is talking about singleness, he's offering the church wisdom. Which is not to say that text is not inspired or infallible, but it's to be treated wisely with discretion. It's for a specific situation. Singleness is a valid situation, but it's not the norm. It's not the norm for the church or for creation. In fact, when the Apostle Paul calls for the qualifications of elders and deacons, the marriage of one wife, this is because they lived in a polygamous context, but marriage is one of those listed as a qualifier. So, I mentioned communion or companionship, covenant, community, cosmology. Communion, God who is triune, eternal, infinite, has enjoyed community. And we reflect that longing for community as we reflect his image. We were made for it. We commune with God, but we also commune with each other. The communion that a man and a woman have together is greater than what simple friendship brings. And it is reserved for marriage. Companionship. The man was not made alone. He had all the works of creation. He had God. He had not transgressed the covenant of works. And yet he was alone. And God gives to Adam his counterpart, a helpmeet, who would help him where he lacked emotional, physical, intellectual, spiritual. John Calvin said this about marriage, about his wife, an inseparable associate of my life. Covenant. It is self-giving, self-autonomy, sacrificing aspect that is often lost. For all of you who are married, you said a vow, something similar to this. These were my wedding vows that I gave to my wife. With this ring, I give you my promise that from this day forward, you will not walk alone. May my heart be your shelter, my arms be your home. May we walk together through all things. May you feel deeply loved, for indeed you are. Covenant, it's a promise. Does Jesus reconfigure the covenant and marriage from the Old Testament? No. It's true that the kingdom of God actually brings in continuity that encompasses and grafts all believers together. Family of God. Does it say that you'll have mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, hundredfold in this life and the life that is to come? But the creational family is deeply intertwined. God deals with family. Remember the Apostle Peter, when he stands up in Acts chapter 2, he says, what? To you and your households is this covenant. Children of believing parents are called holy. Paul deals with husbands, wives, parents, children. The family is an integral part of both testaments, creation and redemption. And this attack on the family, it's not a new war. It goes all the way back to the garden with the disunity in relation. The man refuses to take ownership of his covenantal breaking. He blames his wife. He blames the serpent. Man's labors that were supposed to be a delight are now cursed. Woman's joy of bringing children into the world is now increased in pain. The seed of the woman is now at war with the seed of the devil. And what happens to the first two sons of Adam? They murder. Adam and Eve try again, producing son after son after son. The cosmic war is going on and on between the two seeds, and it continues until Christ comes. But now the war is against families in general, because there is a picture in the family of redemption. The Christian family specifically, because the Christian family is an agent of that redemption. God instituted marriage in creation. Therefore, it's a creational institution. It's not a Christian institution. It is creational. But that should not be the argument to say, well, since it's not a Christian institution, let's just be rid of it. No, it's creational. It belongs to the Lord. God, who is wholly separate from his creation, makes distinctions, and he structures the cosmos. He separates dark from light, heavens from the earth, water from the land, animals from man, male from woman. Marriage is created by God for mankind for their good. God forms people to inhabit and care for and populate the earth. He creates man after a special consultation. He says, let us make man after our own image and likeness. He created humanity as distinct sexes, as man and woman. He blesses them and gives them the whole earth as their wedding present. You're welcome. We have the origin, we have the essence, and the destiny of humanity. The first human being was not an androgynous being, contrary to some popular contemporary theologians. It's nonsense. He was not a neutered form. He had a specific sex. He was clearly a man, and clearly alone. James B. DeYoung captures this thought perfectly. God could have made 1,000 males for Adam, yet he would not have fully achieved his own image and its internal diversity. Without that full orb picture, his own being would have gone unknown and unknowable. Only a woman, not another man, could complete the divine design for humankind. Everything Adam needed was there. He had food, he had water, animals, but they could not help him accomplish that most important aspect of his divine call, which was to fill the earth, to subdue it, to take dominion and steward over all land and sea. Those who facilitate the heavens and the management of the earth. The loneliness that Adam experienced was a divine one, inherent in his being, for God said, it is not good that man is alone. Woman is later called Eve, was not made as an afterthought. She was made from, remember, does not a man love his own body? The earth supplied the material to make the man, so the man supplied the material to make the woman. Flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. She was not made to be self-sufficient, and a man was not made to be alone. She was not made to be independent of the man or some part of unique principle and the head of the human race. Independent of the man or some part of a unique principle and head of the human race. And God is creator of the bride. He walks her down the aisle. The Garden of Eden is in bloom. The stars and the planets are singing the chorus while the congregation and the beasts of the field watch and wait. The two shall become one, formed from his side, not from his foot to be dominated, from his head to rule over him, from his side. From a natural sense, there are physical distinctions, psychological distinctions, strengths, weaknesses. where each one is gifted and work together for oneness. In our union, we never lose the distinction of who we are, but we work together, we fit together to create something wonderful, really united for a sacred service and a precious calling. Don't forget that this calling of stewardship, faithfulness, marriage, family is used in response now to the curses that came from the fall. The seed of the woman versus the seed of the devil. Our Lord then affirms this when he speaks about marriage. For this reason shall a man leave his mother and father, who are still together, cleave to his wife. How strong that love for the woman has to be that he would leave his own mom and dad for another person. The two in oneness, husband and wife, and eventually three in oneness with the advent of the first child. And this is the beginning of society, the beginning of the story of redemption. God works with families, and we see this in covenant keeping from Abraham to the inauguration of the new covenant. This covenant is to you and your children. The family is the model of the Holy Family. The church, the structure of officers in the church as male, is a model of creation. The apostle roots his argument there. Christ is the head of the church and is his body, as Adam was the head of Eve. Jesus gives himself for the church and washes her with the Word and with the Spirit. As an example, we see in the Apostle Paul's words about husbands in Ephesians 6, or Ephesians 5, Christ honors marriage and the family in his earthly ministry. He attends a wedding at Cana, performing his first miracle there. Probably, he was the most sought-after wedding guest ever after that. And he says that there will be a time when some have to abstain from marriage for a season for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And of course, there are difficulties that come with persecution and for those who give suck. But in light of the difficulties ahead, does he throw out marriage? No. He defends it against adultery and divorce. Marriage images the fellowship between Christ and his church. Thus, the Christian family is a family in the Lord and a family that fellowships with Christ, where Christ is the center, which is modeled after love, forgiveness, admonishing one another to good works, cultivating the gifts and fruits of the Spirit. And thus, as families multiply, they become societies. And a family is the moral health of a society. Consider societies where fathers are not present. Social studies have shown that a fatherless home is the number one reason for increased crime, academic failure, breakdown in future relationships, drug addiction, and other issues. The mother does not have the support to have at home in disciplining. Undisciplined homes lead to societies that lack traits necessary to make a healthy society. And now we're told today that the gender blender of terms at fathers and mothers is actually optional. The legalization of gay marriage has solidified this into society. Mothers and fathers are merely optional and not a part of divine providence for the good of the world. And the family is losing its foundation and its emotional unity. A pagan cosmology, a pagan worldview seeks to undo marriage and family altogether, undo the distinctions. At TruthXChange, Dr. Peter Jones, my boss, he says that marriage is the cosmological key to the universe. As I mentioned before, marriage is not a Christian institution, it's a creational institution. Male and female, man leaving his mother and father to cleave to his wife, become one flesh. The trueness of marriage for oneness. Oneness in purpose, unity, interest, goals, sharing a common life and a common future. A conjugal union, creating children to carry out that same vision and for the good of society. Whereas in paganism, oneness, on the other hand, involves the destruction of the distinctions. Okay? We eliminate the male-female distinction. We eliminate God and creation. I'm God. God is within everything. Be your own God. Do what you want. Marriage is an eschatological picture of the gospel, meaning things to come. It is the coming bridegroom, Christ, who will redeem his bride, the church, and the rest of the cosmos. Sometimes I've heard other Christians say, well, we don't really need to focus on marriage. We need to focus on the gospel. Marriage is not a gospel issue, they'll say. If you destroy marriage and family, what is left of the Christian message when you think about it in those terms? History begins with a wedding, and it ends in a wedding. What happens when you destroy the idea of family? The idea of mother and father, husband and wife, Christ as the groom and the church as the bride. Is marriage a gospel issue? Well, we have God, who's a loving Father, who sends His Son in love to redeem those He adopts as family, whom He disciplines as a loving Father in order to prepare a bride for His Son, the bridegroom. Marriage and family are gospel issues. One last quote, and we'll close on this. An army of evil besieges the life of the family, the infidelity of the husband, the stubbornness of the wife, the disobedience of the child, both the worship and the denigration of the woman, tyranny as well as slavery, the deduction and hatred of men, both idolizing and killing children, sexual immorality, human trafficking, concubinage, bigamy, polygamy, polyandry, adultery, divorce, incest, unnatural sins whereby men can commit scandalous acts with men, women with women, men with boys, women with girls, men and women and children with each other, people with animals, the stimulation of lust by impure thoughts, words, images, plays, literature, art, clothing, glorifying nudity and elevating even the passions of the flesh into the service of deity. All of these and similar sins threaten the existence and undermine the well-being of the home. That was written by Herman Bavinck in 1908. Okay? The church will persevere. But we have to take our calling seriously.